I do have a few questions in the chat box. This is one for Dr. Griebel-Thompson. Do you have any information about dietary patterns and iodine status, e.g. vegan, vegetarian, etc.?
Hi, I hope you all can hear me okay. So in the ADORE study, which was the clinical trial that the participants in my study were recruited for, we haven't done any dietary pattern analysis yet, so I can't speak specifically to my study. And as we don't know the iodine intake of Americans, I also can't speak to Americans, but there was a study published in the British Journal of Nutrition, which states that vegans and vegetarians are at risk for iodine deficiency. So I do think it would be worth investigating what is the iodine status of vegetarians and vegans in the US.
Okay, I think this is another question for you. On the vegan diets, where iron, zinc, etc., increases enough to make up for less bioavailability?
I don't think that was for me. I think that was for, is it Julie, the last
I
presentation?
think that's for me. Yes, thank
That's for
you.
you? Okay. The
It's all right.
person who said this did not indicate who it was for.
So to answer that,
Go ahead.
I'll go ahead and I can go ahead and take a stab at it. So what we did in our modeling study was we tried to use the same processes or very similar processes to what the dietary guidelines food pattern modeling group did. So in their food pattern modeling analyses, as far as our lab group was able to tell, they also did not account for bioavailability of iron or zinc. So we also did not account for that in our analyses. And I recognize, and this is actually presented in the abstract that we submitted to this conference, as well as to our paper that was recently published in Journal of Nutrition, we have a section detailing, well, this is still a really important consideration, but it's not something that we included in this study.
Okay, this is another question for Julie. How did you account for ensuring adequate B12 intake in the vegan modeling?
So this one was kind of an interesting surprise for me. So I think the reason that we saw adequate amounts of B12 in our modeled ovo-vegetarian and vegan diets is that we had 3 servings a day of the soy milk and soy yogurt composite, or the soy milk and soy yogurt dairy alternative group. And that has approximately the same amount of B12 as dairy does. So we didn't actually see differences or a decrease in B12 intake on those diets.
Okay, and here's another question. I think this might be for Julie again. The difference in energy between a healthy eating pattern and the ovo-lacto and vegan eating patterns is about 75 kilocalories. If individuals are to achieve their energy requirement, the offset of other food beverages would be required, which may alter their ability to achieve nutrient goals. Was this investigated in the analysis?
We did not investigate that in this analysis. Our primary purpose was to see just what are the differences. Can you meet most of the nutrient recommendations, the dietary reference intakes on these adaptations of the healthy vegetarian dietary pattern? But like I mentioned, when I talked through the results, we see that the amounts of discretionary calories, we didn't change those either. So there is a little bit of wiggle room, but I agree that's certainly a food for thought, if you will.
Okay, again, question. Very nice talk on vegan diet modifications. Thanks for it. Good point about iodine. So I guess not a question, but a compliment. We'll always take those. A question for this speaker, though. Eggs and dairy FFEDs are often from recipes / mixed dishes. A lot of baked products. How does this modeled replacement practically represent how these foods would be consumed? What would be replaced in mixed dishes and baked goods?
I think this was your question, wasn't it, Dr. O'Connor?
Yeah,
that you posted? Okay. So we did think about this. So what we see with the dietary guidelines, of course, is that we have these recommended USDA food patterns, but we see, whether it's explicitly given or implicitly given in the DGA, examples of how to actually eat those food patterns, right? You have pictures of foods, you have ideas of how you might actually turn these recommendations for 3 servings of vegetables a day, 2 servings of fruit a day into an actual day of meals and mixed dishes. But when you have something that you're creating an adaptation of, like these vegan and ovo-vegetarian models, you don't have examples for how to do that. So this first study was to see, well, can you even meet the dietary reference intakes for these diets if you take out dairy and you take out eggs, or you take out both? And then our next paper that our group is working on is, well, can you actually, it's one thing to say, okay, you can meet the nutrient requirements, but can you actually do that in the context of a real diet that an actual person would eat? Because no one's going to their fridge and being like, oh, I better get my like 3 cups of broccoli in for today. No, they're gonna make broccoli cheese soup or something, you know, with broccoli in it. So excellent point. And we are thinking about it.
Okay, here's a comment from Dr. Pearson regarding the USDA iodine database. It was published 2 years ago. It contains about 430 US foods. It is constantly expanding to include iodine contributing foods and dietary supplements. We are linking values to foods reported in NHANES 2013 and on. Hopefully this will provide a resource for researchers. So, and okay, I have a question for Majd. I noticed in your pie charts, looking at the percentage of people who had enough iodine between women and men, and the numbers were pretty consistent up until their teen years. Then the men started being further behind. Was that?
That's not for me.
You know, that was for you. Sorry, I meant
You
sodium.
said
and
iodine.
potassium. I said iodine. That was my mistake. I meant sodium and potassium intake.
Yes.
And as it changed in men and women in their teens, and you know, women were doing a lot better, but men less so. Any thoughts as to why?
So it was, were you, let me see. So you're talking about the pie charts?
Yes. And you had, you know, the percent
Oh.
of intakes by women and by men.
Yes.
And, you
But-
know,
but there's-
until their teen years, they were fairly consistent. Then all of a
Right.
sudden, the men got a lot worse.
That's a good question. There's no reasoning behind it when it comes to the data that we were analyzing. Like there's no suggestion as to why that happened. But I think that it might be because women usually, that's the age when they start thinking more about their diet and their health. And this might be a big contributor to the difference.
Yeah, I think as, I don't know, men become teenagers and young men and start eating, I don't know, more takeout food or whatever.
Right, and the
Get
protein.
away from their
ratio
parents
starts
where
to
they were.
increase daily.
Yeah. And then I was looking, you mentioned some changes, I guess, based on your modeling between sodium and potassium consumption. Are they significantly different? Because sometimes the numbers didn't look very large, the differences.
The difference between after the modification of the 25%
Yes.
changes?
Mhm,
Yes,
yeah.
it's not a big difference, but you need to keep in mind that we have tackled only 3 categories. So we're trying to look at what is the best way to make the biggest change. If we just start with these 3 categories and then later on try to work on other categories with manufacturers, I think it might be a good step.
Mhm. Okay, this is a question for Dr. Griebel-Thompson. All salt was assumed to not be iodized. Is this assumption based on typical consumption? What portion of salt consumption is iodized? Is it possible to determine with current consumption data?
Okay, so this is definitely the biggest limitation of our study, was that we didn't know if the salt use was iodized or not. This was a secondary analysis of a larger clinical trial, and that clinical trial was not designed around iodine. It was designed around DHA supplementation. So when the study was being designed, they didn't think to emphasize asking about iodized salt. So we just don't have that data. But a paper published in Nutrients estimates that about 53% of salt purchased in the United States is iodized. So really that's like, you could go either way, because about half of the salt bought in the US is iodized. And we chose to, we made an assumption and we chose to go with that salt reported like from a salt shaker was not iodized. It was something we had to make a choice, and that was the choice we made.
Yeah, as I recall, some of the specialty salts like sea salt and Himalayan pink salt, I don't believe are iodized, though there might be some naturally present, because remember some of the analyses were done on this, and I was discussing it before I retired. Let's see, and then we got a question. Curious to know if essential amino acids were analyzed in the dairy/alt vegan diets to see if they meet the recommended guidelines. I think that's for Julie.
Yeah, sounds like that's for me.
Yeah.
So no, we didn't look at protein quality when we made the dairy composite, between the dairy composite and the dairy alt composite we created. And I saw that this was another question. Why did you only use soy products? Well, that's the only alternative to dairy foods that the DGA currently recommends. And soy, if you look at it, compared to dairy in terms of protein quality, they usually end up being about equivalent.
Okay. Let's see, do I have any more?
David, I accidentally kicked one of Johanna's questions over to answered when I was trying to ask Dr. Hess the question.
That's okay, because I think I'd already asked the question, so that's okay.
Okay.
And I think with that, I don't believe there are any more questions. Guess we may end a few minutes early, but we'll turn this over. But again, thank you again for great presentations. And we'll turn this over to Theo, who will give us our wrap up for a successful day one of the 42nd National Nutrient Data Bank Conference.
Thank you, David. And thank you again to all of our speakers today. What a wonderful, informative first day it was. I'd like to, just as some housekeeping, let everybody know that we will be posting all of the presentations you've heard today and the other ones you will hear later in the week on YouTube, where they will be publicly available later in the week. So look out for communication around that. The posters are also available on the NNDC website, along with, of course, our poster room in the gather space. And we hope that you all join us again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern time for another content-filled day of nutrient data.